All right. Good morning. Good morning. I totally forgot to do my screen share. Give me a second here. Silly girl. All right. Share. Let's make sure we can see that. Comments are coming up. Yay, comments are working. Sounds like she has an evil hubby and we'll be better off. Church to come. Well, here's the thing. Um, for those of you who can't see the chat, Penny looks for her readers. Yeah, they're right here. Um, I don't think infidelity has to be a marriage ender. It often is, but I don't think it has to be. The problem that I generally find, and I found that with my ex, was that it's often just not once. And so I have personal experience with this. And a close friend of mine um, is married to a guy who has cheated on her. I mean, since the beginning of their relationship, multiple times. Um, I don't want to give too many details, but I mean, it's this behavior pattern um, that for some people is a pattern. I mean, I'm guessing there are people out there that it's a one-off for. Um, and there are issues in the marriage that you can work on and you can fix and you can build trust again. Absolutely. It doesn't have to end a marriage. And I know people who have gotten through it. And I just, I think there are just so many out there where it is a behavior uh, it is a behavior pattern. And so Gypsy will be praying against that it's not some kind of um, behavior pattern that she's just finding out about. Um, because man, that's hard. I mean, I just remember going through that and the emotions and feeling so betrayed. And I had suspected for years, and people had hinted at it for years, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I guess like deep down, I knew, but I mean, we had 3 kids, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do? I'm just going to upend their whole lives. And I would have absolutely stayed and worked it out, but he left to be with the other woman, the most current other woman, who he married, who it didn't work out because they felt like, he calls me one day and he's like, yeah, we're getting divorced. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, I just didn't feel like I could trust her. Well, she had cheated on her husband. He had cheated on me. And I'm like, wow, who could have seen that coming? Idiot. And, he's just gone through a slew of other women. The last, I don't know if he's married to the most current one that he cheated with, but the last wife is stepmom to my kids, who I love her. And he cheated on her when her daughter turned 5. And my oldest son was 5 when I caught him. He had been cheating for a while, and I'm sure he'd been cheating on her for a while, but that's when she left. And it was so funny because I remember telling her one time, I said, just wait. Someday you're going to be the crazy ex-wife. He's going to tell people that story that you're crazy and you trapped him into having all these kids, and it's all BS. Um, and this woman, some woman's going to believe that, and you're going to end up finding out that he's with her, and it was just terrible the way she found out. And so we'll definitely be praying for your friend because it is tough, and hopefully it is something that's just a one-off that they can work through. And um, it's just so sad, because you don't just cheat on your spouse, you cheat on your entire family, because it's a commitment you make to your spouse that then carries over to your children. And so that's just really, yeah, Freestone Trust is really hard to rebuild. And you find yourself always wondering, and is he or she really where they say they are? And every little thing makes you wonder. Hey, Donna, is this the first? Yep, this is the first read for this book. And if you miss any of the book reads, you can go into playlists. I don't think you can do that on Roku or Fire Stick or Apple TV yet. I don't think the playlists show up. But if you come in through the internet, you can go to playlists and you can catch all the past shows of all the books we've read. So if you go into my playlist, every book we've read is in there, and they're in their own playlist. And so you can just go through and start listening. Um, and a lot of them are different. I usually am reading 2 different books at the same time. I just have to make sure they're very different, or I tend to get the characters screwed up. Good morning. Let's get sewing. Good to see you, my friend. Thank you for the donation. I got that the other day. It is sad. I'm glad I have Don too. Don is just, it's so funny because I think you kind of know if you're with a guy who has it in him to cheat. And Don is a horrible liar. I mean, horrible. Like, if he tries to lie about, like a surprise party, you just can't tell him because there's no way you could just read it all over him. So, and he's scared that I would kill him. So there's that, always good to have some fear of what might happen. My ex collected more last names after me, all Italian for some reason, maybe because she moved to Rhode Island. There are a lot of Italians in Rhode Island. I'm learning so much. My ex is now the broke, bitter one. Yeah, what's interesting is my ex is with this woman who doesn't trust him, and so she tracks him everywhere, and like he's a radio disc jockey. So everywhere, every event he goes to, she goes with him because she can't trust him. So he can't get out from under her thumb, which we think is just super funny. But it's sad because Donna's really worried that I would kill him. I think because I'm a nurse and I could probably make it look like an accident. Of course, now I'd never get away with it because I told you, God forbid anything happens to me. I'm the first person they're going to look at, and anything happens to him. Tim says I had 3 fiancés post divorce, but was diagnosed with an allergy to marriage. I stayed single for a really, really long time, and then I went through some really bad dating. We've talked about some of the horrible dates. I'm trying to think. You guys probably haven't heard this, but I went out on a date with a guy. Never date a bartender. You spend most of the time in a bar. Yeah, I would think so. Um, I went out. So the girls where I worked at the time hooked me up on this date with this guy, and um, and his name was Harrison. And they told me, they said, now they knew that I was not the kind of girl that was just going to hook up. And so they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, you'll love this guy." Um, he's super religious. So I didn't really want somebody super religious. I just wanted somebody who wasn't on a conquest, right? And so they're like, "Yeah, he can't even wear short sleeves." And I'm like, "Wow, what religion is that you can't even wear short sleeves?" And so I'm getting ready for this date, right? And I'm thinking, "Okay, well, what should I wear? I'll have to cover my arms, lest I offend the Lord." And this man's religious sensibilities. And so I think I wore like a short sleeve blouse with a sweater or something. And so I had agreed to meet this guy at the Waffle House because the guy I'm sure I've told you guys this story. The guy at the Waffle House, I took, maybe, but Pentecostal men can wear, I think, shorts. I don't know, holiness or something maybe. Um, there's all kinds of really backwood religion in Kentucky. And so um, I knew the guy, Hold'em and Mennonite. Oh, I don't think he was a Mennonite. Um, I wouldn't know it if you said it. So the guy that owned the Waffle House, or at least the guy that ran the Waffle House, I had taken care of his wife in home health, and I knew he kept a gun behind the counter. And I didn't know this guy. I hadn't talked to him except for to arrange this date with Harrison. And so I thought, well, we'll do it there. That way, if there's any trouble. And it was like my first dating in a while after the divorce, right? And so my parents have got the kids, and I was still living with mom and dad at the time, putting myself through nursing school. No. I had gotten through nursing school. And so I get there to meet this guy, and I walk in, and I don't want to sound like I'm a snotty bitch, but wow. I walk in, he's got shoulder length hair that looks like he washes it with Crisco. Um, the dandruff, I've never seen dandruff that bad in my life, and I'm a nurse. I've seen a lot. Never, ever, ever. I mean, it was like he'd walked in from a snowstorm or something, or like there had been fire and ash had fallen into his hair. It was crazy. I mean, I had to look twice. I'm like, what is, wow. He's got Coke bottle thick glasses, cystic acne. He's wearing like a striped shirt, and he's got what looks like a tweed jacket with the patches on the sleeve over it, and his teeth are messed up, and I'm thinking, what have my friends done to me? And nurses just have this really sick sense of humor, really sick. And so I'm thinking, okay, you're not going to marry this guy. You're just going to have coffee with him. It's no big deal. And because I'm friendly, I talk to anybody. And I walk up to the table, and the first thing he says to me is, "My daughter got killed by a bush hog. Want to see her picture?" And I was like, what? And so I lived in Texas for a while, and in Texas we have wild boars. And so when he says a bush hog, I'm thinking he means a wild boar, because I I didn't know that a bush hog was could be something else, right? So I'm just dumbfounded, right? And I have the worst poker face ever. And so I'm like, "What?" And he said, "She got killed by a bush hog. Want to see her picture?" And I don't even think I said yes. And so he pulls this picture out, and it's a picture of like his 8-year-old daughter in a casket, and her head is all messed up. And I said, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And he said, "Well, that damn thing done throwed a rock at her, knocked her brains plumb out." And we're sitting at this point, and I'm like, "They can throw rocks?" And I'm like, "They don't even have opposable thumbs. Like, how could they possibly throw rocks? And what why? Why would you throw a rock at a little girl? Like, what venom could they have for this little child that they would throw a rock and kill her?" I mean, I'm just a million things are going through. See, you thought wild boar too. And so I just right. And so I'm just sitting there, and I've got this picture, and I'm like, "Oh my God, like who takes pictures, casket pictures at a funeral?" And it's a Kentucky thing apparently. And I'm originally from Michigan, and I've lived a lot of places, but Kentucky is wow, it's the culture is just wow. And so I decided, I'm like, "Excuse me." So I go to the bathroom, and I splash cold water on my face, and I'm like talking, how you're doing the pep talk to yourself. And I'm like, "It's okay. It's okay. It's just coffee. You'll have the coffee, and then you'll leave, and you never have to see this guy again. It's okay. Balls up. You can do this." I go back to the table, and he has ordered us waffles, and I'm like, "Wait, I no, I never agreed to," and this is just all going on in my head. And and so the lady is over there, and I can see her, and I wonder what holler he was from too. She's got the waffles, and they're like in her hands, right? She's got them plated. And it was this surreal moment. Like, have you ever been in well, they call them bush hogs here. They don't call them, they call them both actually. Um like this moment where you feel like you're in a dream. It's only happened to me like a couple times. Like when my cousin died, everything felt very surreal, and I actually lost my footing and almost fell down when my cousin told me the news, my other cousin. And it was like that. And so the waitress is standing there, and I just have this image of her like with these floating plates on her hand, and she's coming towards the table, and this guy puts his hand in his like the inside pocket of his blazer, and he pulls something out, and his hand's closed, and he slides it across the table to me. And I'm thinking, "Oh God, it's like the tooth of this bush hog, or a vial of its blood, or who knows what this is," right? And so he lets go of it, and he pulls his hand back, and it's a package of Hall's cough drops. And I'm just like, "What?" And so I look at him, and he leans forward, and he says, "Baby, I can do things to you with those that'll make you scream your mama's name." And I'm like, "Oh my God." At what point of ecstasy do I never want to be where I'm yelling, "Oh, Margot." Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And the waitress is like suddenly there, and she's got the waffles, and she looks at me, and I've gone completely white. And she looks at him, and she's like, "What did you say to her? What did you say to her?" And I get up and I run. And so I run to the car, And, Waffle House is a small parking lot. I drop the keys and I'm like, oh, damn it, and I'm trying to get the keys. I can't get the key in the door. I gotta get the key in the door. And he's on me. So he's behind me and I'm facing the car and I turn around. He's got his arms on either side of me. This man lays a kiss on me. I am telling you, he could have told you the condition of my colon. And I'm like, trying to get back away from him. And here comes the waitress running out the door. And she's got her tray in her hand. She's yelling the whole way, you let her go. I said you let her go. And so she gets up to him and she hits him in the back of the head with the tray, which further gags me with his tongue. And she keeps hitting him. I said you let her go. And I'm like, oh my God, somebody help. And so the guy that I don't think he owns the restaurant. I think he just manages the restaurant. The guy comes out and he's got a gun and he's like, son, you better let her go. And this guy, like how the tape measures have the little thing that sucks the tape measure. It was like he had one of those under his chin. He hits that thing and his tongue rolls back up in his head. And I'm like, oh God, and I get in the car and I drive away. He calls for a second date. I have my dad take the call. So I go back to work. And the girls are all just like, tell us about your date. Tell us, because they know what they've set me up for. Right? I'm telling you, this actually he didn't actually have the thing under his chin. I'm just, giving color to the story. So I get to work, and I mean, that's not the worst thing somebody said to me on a date. It's the most shocking, but it's not the worst. And so I get to work. And the girls are like all gathered up. They're like, how's it going? How's it going? How did the date go? And I'm like, you guys, you know his daughter got killed. And they're like, he had another daughter get killed? I'm like, I don't know if he had one before her get killed, but this daughter got killed by a bush hog. It threw a rock and it knocked her brains plumb out. I saw the picture. And they just start cracking up. And I'm like, that's not funny, you guys. And he had told me, I said, well, where are these bush hogs? He said, oh, honey, they's everywhere. They's in the hollers, they's in the hills. I mean, anywhere there's grass, there's bush hogs. They're out there ripping and running, and you got to keep your kids in. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we have like 3 acres. The kids have been out ripping and running, and the bush hogs are out there. I had no idea. Like, why isn't there some kind of public service announcement? And Don, is like, this speaks to your naivete, Penny. And granted, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. Just because I kind of kept my head down after my divorce and I just worked and took care of kids, went to college, and I just stayed out of the fray. And so anyway, the girls are cracking up and I'm like, no, it's really serious. I mean, this thing, I'm like, how could they even throw rocks? I can't figure out how this thing would throw a rock. And they're dying. They're crying. I mean, they're like, falling. They're in their chairs, bent over, laughing. And I'm like, this isn't funny, you guys. This thing killed his little girl. It's true. I thought they thought I was lying. And I'm like, no, I saw the pictures. I saw her in the casket and her head was messed up. And so my friend Melody is like, Penny, she's snot crying. She's like, a bush hog is not a wild boar. It's a mowing implement. And I'm like, what? No, he said a bush hog. She said, it's a thing they hook to the back of a tractor. And when it gets going, it'll throw rocks and they can kill people. And it's actually happened since then. I've heard stories about it on the news of people getting in their car, driving down the interstate and somebody's running a bush hog down the median and a rock gets thrown and some guy got killed in his car, had his window open and got hit by a rock. And so I'm like, wait, what? They're like, she's like, no, honey, you don't need to worry. There's no wild boars. So yeah, that is clearly the most ridiculous date I've ever had. The other bad date that I had, well, no, I don't see him anymore because I don't work with them. But yeah, I didn't date for years after that. And then I joined this site called Plenty of Fish. That's where Don and I actually met. And I went out with this guy named Timothy, who is also religious. Just don't even, that means nothing to me anymore when somebody says that. At least she didn't run her over. That would have been a mess. So I go out with this guy And he's military, super tall, like 6'8", and I'm 5'1". And I met him at the restaurant. I think I parked my car at the mall, which was all like right there in the same parking lot. I get in the booth with this guy, or I get in the booth and he gets in the same side of the booth as me. Who does that on a first date? And so I'm immediately uncomfortable, feeling kind of threatened. I think I'm wearing like a sundress or something. And he puts his hand on my leg and he leans over and he says, when you go on a date with me, you'll sit with your legs apart so that I know that you're open to me. And I'm trying to process it. And I'm thinking, okay, I could go over the table. I can go under the table. How am I going to get out of here? Um, and I can't, right? Because that would be such a scene. And so the waitress comes, he orders for me, orders something that I'm allergic to. And so I say to him, I said, I'm sorry, I can't eat that. I'm allergic. And he looks at me with the waitress standing there and says, for issues like this, you need to have told me that ahead of time. So he orders me something else. I still don't get to order for myself. Well, now I'm all upset and scared and trying to figure out how I'm going to get away from this guy. And right? And and so I can barely eat. And so then after the meal, and he sits on the same side with me the whole time. I feel like I'm a prisoner. I keep giving the side eye to the waitress, and she's watching like from across the restaurant. I can see her kind of looking over to make sure I'm okay. And I couldn't eat. And so he said why is that door open? Um, he said the next time we go out, when I order you something, you'll finish it. And I mean, there were no signs of this that I could perceive ahead of time. And I had talked to him. I don't know. I mean, we'd talked on the phone. We'd had several conversations. And after that, I never agreed to dinner again. It was always just coffee. Um, Not with him. And so I don't even know if I had a cell phone then. I assume I did. So anyway, I'm just totally off kilter and feeling not safe. And so we're leaving and he's going to drive me over to my car. And I keep telling him, no, no, it's fine. It's fine. I'll just walk over there. It's not that far. It's no big deal. And so he kind of, he's walking with me and he opens the door. There's a dating app for hookers. It's called Plenty of Fish. Oh, it's not that one's the one that I met Don on is not for hookers. Um, and so we're standing at the car door, at the passenger truck door, and I'm trying to leave. And he's like, don't be ridiculous. Get in the truck. And he's just got this authoritative way about him that really intimidated me. So I get in the truck. I'm like, look, just get me to the car and I'm going to get out of here, right? Just whatever. So there's at this time in Richmond, Kentucky, the right side of the mall isn't developed yet. Just the left side of the mall is. Well, instead of driving to my car, he drives over to this undeveloped side. And I'm scared. And so I'm like clinging to the door and he's just driving around real slow. And he says to me, give me your panties. And I was like, what? No. And he said, when I ask you to do something, you need to do it the first time I ask. And I'm like, what are you, my weird, creepy dad or something? No, I'm not giving you my underwear. And so we engage in this back and forth. And there's a guy that is way on the other side of the parking lot in one of those little like golf cart security vehicles. And I am beaming thoughts to this guy. I'm like, please come over here, drive over here, help me. And somehow this guy like hears my beamed thoughts, I guess, or notices that we're over there more likely. And so the guy I'm in the truck with is like, look, since you're new, new? What does that mean? Since you're new, I'm going to let it go this time. But when you get home, you need to mail them to me. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. And so this guy, first date, this guy, the security guy in the golf cart pulls up. And instead of pulling up to his side of the car, he pulls up to my side of the truck. And so I'm like, opening the window and he's like, ma'am, are you okay? And I said, I need to go back to my car. I need to go back to my car right now. And he can tell I'm just totally freaked out. And so he's like, sir, unlock the door. And he just looks at me and I look at the security guy. The security guy's like, sir, unlock the door and let her out. And so he lets me out and I get in the little golf cart thingy with the guy, and I'm crying. He's driving me to the car, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know what he was going to do to me. And he ordered me food I couldn't eat, and he wanted my underwear. But yeah, so I think I went out with one more guy after that, and then I met Don. Thank God. Thank God. Misery Tim says, all this time I thought I was supposed to open doors for women. I should have been asking for undies, right? Well, and I'm thinking, how often does this work for you? Like, do you have women that, I don't, I never met a guy like that before in my whole life. And I've talked, I mean, I'm a nurse, I meet all kinds of people, and I never ever had plenty of crabs. I see what you did there, Tim. But yeah, thank God for Don. So I meet Don, and we of course hit it off right away. And I went and talked to him on the phone. I wanted to hear his voice in person for the first time. And we met at a Cracker Barrel for lunch, and it was totally normal. We ended up spending the whole day together, and I'm telling him about these bad dates. He's like, "Oh my gosh, you're kidding me." And he says, the worst I get is that a woman's like, "Oh, you're not 6 foot. I can't go out with you." Or, "Do you have land?" And when I tell them, "No, I own my house, but I don't own land," then they don't want to date me. And I'm thinking, who are these? Have these women gone out with Tim and Harrison? Because I think if they had, the importance of having land would not seem such a big deal. I wonder how he keeps. He's probably like a serial killer, and these are his souvenirs. He's probably got like a one of those pinup boards that they use on TV with all of the yarn that attaches the crime scenes to. He's probably got like the underwear pinned up, and then there's a little piece of yarn that goes to the girl's picture, and then a little piece of yarn that goes to a map where he's buried the body. That's my best guess. But I mean, I was just, wow, so I have 3 dates on Plenty of Fish. Harrison wasn't one of them, but Tim was one. The other guy that I dated, that I went out on one date with for coffee, showed up, and he didn't have his shirt tucked in, and it was like a shirt that you should tuck in, and it was really sloppy, and his shoes were filthy. Not because he had been working, just because that's all the effort he went to meet a girl on a first date for coffee. And he was actually really nice. And so I told him, I said, this isn't going to work. Um, it is more scary than fun. Hey, Jacob. And so that guy was super nice. And there just was no chemistry at all with him. And so I said, and I'm just one of those people, like, if I go out with you, I'm not going to string you along for a bunch of dinners and movies and stuff. I'll just tell you. And so I said, look, it's not going to work. I just don't feel like there's a connection with us. But I said, I do want to give you just, some things to think about going forward as you're trying to find somebody. And I said, tuck your shirt in, iron it, wear clean shoes. And I said, I think, that initial presentation is kind of off-putting, and I think you'd do better if you did those things. And I ended up being friends and talking for a while after that. But I mean, the other one was super normal, you know? But I just got two bad ones almost in a row. And I didn't date for years after Harrison. And then the next time I started dating was when I got on the Plenty of Fish app, went out with Tim, went out with that one guy, Bruce, I think was his name, with the filthy shoes. And I mean, like, filthy shoes, like mud tracking off him into the coffee shop. And the shirt was, I want to say the shirt was misbuttoned. You know how like you miss a button and then the shirt's not buttoned? Like, it looked like he had woke up, got dressed in the dark, and came for the date. So anyway, how we got into all of that. Oh, because of the affair. Yes, that's how I got off on that rant. So there's that. No, I'm embarrassed that I've told you all of that. I don't know why, because I think I've told you both of those stories before. But I'm pink, so we'll go on. Probably it wasn't the same guy. Um, I don't remember even noticing the shoes of the bush hog guy. He could have been, probably if he'd been barefoot, I would have noticed, but otherwise, oh, I hate the blushing. Don thinks it's the cutest thing. He's like, I think it's adorable that you blush. Why do you hate it? And I said, because it's this outward betrayal of what's going on the inside of your body that you're embarrassed. That was the best Western novel ever. The date, or really you liked the last book? Tim's totally screwing with me. Anyway, so we have a book to read. And there you go. All right. Now I got to get it together here. I don't know why it embarrassed me so bad to tell it this time. Ah, okay, here we go. I'm going to try to make this work. Tim, shut up. Okay, so this book, just so you guys know, it wasn't the next book in the series, but this book is a series of short stories, and this format's really going to work. Short Western with Penny. This is a short story book, so it's really going to work because um, for the weeks we're going to be gone a week camping. I don't think we'll be gone for the last of the book, but we might be. So I can just read a short story and post the video, and that'll be easier than and easier to track and everything, I think, than doing a bunch, a whole long book. Anyway, I'm just a mess now. Sorry. Don's like, why do you tell them those stories? I'm like, because they're super funny. Okay. So this is by Jack Schaefer. It's the same author from Shane. And I want to say I can't remember which book and series this is, but the first story is called Something Lost. Hopefully you guys can hear okay. Shake it off. June. This was far up in the mountains, and still the great peaks climbed, thrusting and thinning to the bare bones of rock above the timberline. The high upland valley was lost among them, an irregular pocket caught in the soaring immensity, rimmed by the timeless rock, its glints of meadow green shading into the darker green of forest where it broke into the downward slopes. The figure of the man by the stream near the upper end of the valley, where the water slowed from its rush down the rocks, was unbelievably small in the vastness. He stood stooped by a sandbar where the riffles swung and died in a pool, and the slant sunlight flashed on the worn tin in his hands, and his shoulders rocked as his arms moved in a circular motion. The motion stopped, and the man bent his head farther to peer into the pan in his hands, and the dull gleaming of the flakes there was reflected in the pale hazel irises of his eyes. He straightened and nodded his head in slow satisfaction. He studied the sandbar and the pool where the water slipped into apparent stillness, and the silt of years had settled to the bottom. He raised his head and looked at the untouched wilderness about him. The valley lay open around him, a half-mile wide and a mile long, its level floor cut by the swinging course of the stream. And at its head, the mountain wall rose steeply in huge broken steps that the stream took in rushes and falls as it drove down from the endless snow in the far upper reaches of rock. Along the valley sides, the slopes climbed, tree-dotted and thicket-entangled, to stop against the enduring stone, on the near side against a high sharp ridge, on the opposite side against a buttress towering out to tremendous cliff edge. Oh, hopefully the whole thing's not going to be so descriptive. Between the ridge and the buttress, the valley entrance swept out to open parkland that dropped abruptly into jack pine forest, covering the downward slopes and divided by the deepening gorge of the stream as it sought the lower levels. And beyond the ground rose again, rising in ridge upon ridge, to the high eastward mountain barrier. The man nodded his head again in slow satisfaction, and the sun shone warm on the broad, flat plains of his face beneath the wide, squared brim of his hat. He took a leather pouch from a pocket and eased the flakes into it. He strode across the carpet of wildflowers bordering the stream and bent to pick up the trailing lead rope of the grazing burro. By the slope of the near valley side, where a thickening stand of spruce and juniper fringed the valley floor, he stopped and pulled the rifle and axe and short shovel from under the tie ropes and unfastened the pack and picketed the burro on a 20-foot rope length. He selected a fallen tree angling up the upper end wedged in a crotch of another tree. Using this as his ridge pole, he began building his shelter. He shed his jacket, and sweat darkened the faded brown of his shirt as his short, broad body swung in steady rhythm, and the axe blade bit into the springy wood. Across the meadow green, across the wildflower carpet and the stream, half a mile across the stretching expanse of valley floor, and 200 yards up the opposite slope, where bare rock jutted over a flat ledge, the great bear lay and watched the man. It lay limp on the ledge in the warm slant sun, hind legs sprawled back, front legs stretched forward with the big head, broad and dished to the muzzle, resting on the rock between them. A light breeze ruffled through the short brown fur made ragged by the remaining long, still unshed hairs, touched with silver on the tips. Its small, far-sighted eyes followed the man's every move among the distant trees. 80-odd miles away, over the mountain barrier to the east, where a ragged collection of rude log cabins and tents straggled along the side of an almost dry stream bed, men worked at their wooden cradles and sluice boxes and grumbled to themselves and each other. The showings of color that had drawn them there to stake their claims were dwindling. In the oblong tarpaulin roof shack that served as store and bar, other men spoke of the one who had left, quietly speaking to no one, abandoning his slow, half-worked claim to disappear with his burro into the high distances to the west. Their talk was tainted with envious wondering. They argued with each other in edged monotones. Unrest and disappointment crawled through the mining camp. Far up in his valley, as the midnight stars wheeled in their slow course, the man stirred on his bed of spruce boughs, and sat up, suddenly alert. "Hey, Dad." um, if that is my dad, John Brooks. The embers of the fire outside the open end of his shelter had faded to a dull glow that meant nothing to the moonless dark under the trees. He heard the burro moving restlessly on its shortened picket rope. In the following silence, he felt a familiar prickling on the back of his neck as the short hairs there stiffened in response to some instinct beyond reach of the mind. His right hand moved and took the rifle, and he was leaning forward to rise when he heard the burro scream and lunge to the end of the rope. "I am him. Hi, Dad." You guys, my dad's in the chat. He's on Facebook, though, so my Rumble folks probably can't see him. His right hand moved and took the rifle, and he was leaning forward to rise when he heard the burro scream and lunge to the end of the rope. He leaped to his feet and stood in the open end of the shelter, baffled by the unrelenting blackness of the night. Gradually, he could make out the darker shapes of the trees. He went cautiously toward the burro and found it half choked by the taut rope. He spoke softly, and it pushed against him, and together they stood in a silence that lived and breathed around them. There were not a single separate discernible sound. My dad knows about the dating stories. I lost my spot. There was not a single separate discernible sound, yet the prickling persisted on his neck, and the flesh of the burro quivered against him. The prickling died, and the burro quieted, and they stood in an empty silence. The man returned to the fire and piled wood on it, and kneeled to blow until flames sprang, and a circle of firelight fought back the dark. He shifted the burro closer to the circle before he lay again on his spruce bed. In the morning, the man found the tracks. Those of the forefeet were nearly 7 inches wide and 9 long. Those of the hind feet 8 inches wide and 14 long. The claw marks of all 5 toes on each were plain. Apprehension crept along the man's spine. His hands tightened on the rifle. The tracks led in a circle around his camp and close in by the shelter and again by the place where the burrow had first been picketed. He crawled inside his shelter to the low diminishing end where his meager supplies, deep depleted by weeks of wandering, were cached behind a barrier of short logs. He took a handful of cartridges and dropped them into a jacket pocket. Outside again, he strode off, steady and unhurried, following the tracks away. They led him across the stream below the pool and across the level of the valley. He lost them on the edge of a field of slide rock near the lower end of the valley. He skirted the field and could find no further trace. He turned back and began a thorough circuit of the valley. He found signs in many places, old tracks caked where the ground had dried, and fresher tracks in soft ground. He found 3 rubbing trees with bark worn thin, and high up, higher than he could reach, gashes where the bark had been torn open crosswise by big, gripping jaws. He found the trail angling up the far slope to the ledge. It was hard-packed by years of use, by generations of animals reaching back into the dim past, so packed that the imprints of the big claws were all but invisible scratches on the hard surface. Approaching the ledge, he saw the wide and narrowing crevice behind it, leading back to blackness under the overhanging rock. No light could penetrate the inner dark depth. He dropped silently back down the trail 50 yards and crouched behind a big stone and shouted, and there was no response except the jeering call of a jay. He shouted again and waited. At last he strode down the trail and across the valley. In a few moments he was stooped by the pool, his arms moving in circular motions as the sun glinted on the pan in his hands. But now he looked up at regular intervals and scanned the expanse all around him, and the rifle lay within quick reach, not more than a yard from his steady hands. Out of the valley, 8 miles around the jagged sweep of the vast rock buttress that towered above the opposite slope, out where the forest of jack pine below the edged parkland flowed unbroken down the shore of a small lake, the great bear lay in a patch of sunlight on the soft needle carpet. Already it had forgotten the man and the burrow. They were new sights, new scents, never before known, tucked away now in the reservoir of experience, and would remain untouched until a fresh encounter summoned the remembrance into being. They had been seen and smelled and investigated in the caution of the night and dismissed. There was no challenge in them for the bear to understand. A marten drifted down the trunk of a nearby tree, stretching its small pointed head outward to stare intently at the bear. The scritch of the small claws in the bark was barely audible a few feet away, yet the bear's head rose. The marten scurried back up the tree. The big head dropped, and the bear, full-fed and lazy, drowsed in the sunlight. The tree shadows moved slowly and crept to engulf the bear, and it rose and padded softly on through the forest. It was obeying its own instinctive calendar of habit, moving on the periodic 4-day feeding march that took it out of the valley on a wide swing and returned through the 37 miles of its mountain-bound range. July. The man strode up the stretch of parkland that edged the forest and led to the valley entrance. The late afternoon sun was full in his face. Behind him, the burro trotted obediently, weighted by the big pack, whose new canvas covering gleamed white in the sunlight. Where the parkland leveled to enter the valley, he stopped and turned to look back the way he had come, down the long, rolling forested slope, sliced by the stream gorge, and up and over the first high ridge beyond. Satisfied at last that no one followed, he turned again and led the burro up the valley and across the green carpet to his camp in the spruce and juniper fringe. Everything there was as he had left it 8 days before. But in the soft ground by the pool, he found the big 5-toed tracks crossing the stream toward his camp and going back again. He looked across the valley and up. The steep side slope curving to the high rock buttress was splendid in the late sunlight, and the overhanging rock and the ledge 200 yards above the valley floor shone rust-red and gray against the green around them. A hawk floated in the air above the scattered clinging trees. There was no other sign of life. He strode back to his camp and began unpacking the burro. Far to the eastward, over the mountain barrier, where the rude cabins and tents marred the bank of the stream bed, men talked to the keeper of the tarpaulined store and bar, worrying again the worn questions of 4 days about the one who had returned with his burro and bought supplies, and shaken bright flakes out of a leather pouch in payment, and disappeared again into the western heights. Already the legend was growing. He had made a rich strike. Mr. Gray, it's okay, buddy. Shaken bright flakes. Already the legend was growing. He had made a rich strike. He was scooping dust out of rich silt pockets by the handful. He had unlimited wealth in dust and nuggets cached in his mountain hideout. Hey, Kara. The voice of a lean man with narrow hatchet face, gashed by a thin-lipped mouth, was tinged with bitterness as he told of his failure in following the boot and hoofmark traces into the mountains. A trail that well hidden must have been deliberately cloaked to cover its destination. The talk warmed and eyes glittered, and the storekeeper did good business over his hewn log bar. Twice in the night the man woke, alert and rising to sitting position on his bed of boughs. There was no sound beyond the barrier of logs with which he had closed the open end of his shelter, except an occasional soft movement of the burrow and the narrow, high-poled enclosure he had built for it. In the morning, there were no new tracks. It was the same the next night, and the next, and early during the night after that, thunder echoed through the mountains, and lightning laced down through the peaks, and enough rain fell in the valley to dampen the ground and renew it for fresh writings by any living thing that walked it. In the morning, the man took the rifle and made another thorough circuit of the valley. He found no fresh signs, no 5-toed tracks except what remained of the old after the erasing action of the rain. But in the moist sand by the stream, where it eddied around rolled rocks well below the pool, he found other tracks, split-hooved, deeply indented. He studied these a long moment. He followed them along the stream, and when they faded into the firm sod, he kept on down the valley. What is it, bud? What? Do you want to come up? Come on. Mr. Gray. Hey, come here. Come here. I know, that's in the way. Come here, buddy. Are you lonely? Do you want to sit and read? All right. Hi, buddy. Nice, sweet boy. Yeah. All right. Old after erasing action of the rain, moist sand. He studied these a long moment. He followed them along the stream, and when they faded into the firm sod, he kept on down the valley. His stride, long for the length of his legs, gnawed steadily into distance. Half an hour later, he was skirting the vast rock buttress, pausing often to scan the sweep of slope open below him. He was well around, out of sight of the valley entrance, when he saw the elk, 3 of them, more than a mile away on the edge of the parkland that slipped abruptly into the jack pine forest. Patient and steady, he began the long approach, angling down the slope to put the light wind directly in his face. Yeah, that's Mr. Gray. And Steve's up here. He's like, I don't know why he gets to sit in your lap. It's okay, bud. It's okay. He's like, it's not okay. Far ahead, where the forest dipped into a deep ravine, a thin column of smoke floated upward from the inside hollow of the shattered stump of a long dead pine. The slow fire, legacy of the lightning, glowed faintly as it ate into the hunk like wood. It edged through a split in the old bark, and little flames began to flicker along the side of the stump. Silly kitties, for sure. Steve, it's okay, bud. Oh my goodness, I'm being stalked. It worked down and began to creep through the carpet of brown needles. It kept to the tiny outstretched dried twigs of the branch ends of a fallen tree and moved hungrily along them, reaching for the more solid wood. The man was on his hands and knees, lifting the rifle carefully and setting it down gently with each forward movement of his right hand. He crawled to the top of a slight rise and lay flat to peer over. I got cat hair on my nose. He was within rifle shot of the elk. He eased the gun forward and let the sight sink down on the closest of the three. It stood quartering away from him, and he aimed a bit behind and below the high foreshoulder and squeezed the trigger. He saw his elk leap a fraction of a second before the others, and the three of them swirl and melt like sudden, swift, shifting shadows into the forest. He rose and went forward and followed. He was well in among the trees when he found the first blood drops, spattered and dark from internal bleeding. He lengthened his stride to follow the trace deeper into the forest. 40 minutes later, winded from climbing over and around down timber, he jumped the wounded elk out of a bushed hollow, and his bullet, fired almost without aiming, in the instant reflex of long experience, broke the animal's neck as it strove with flagging strength to leap away. Down the slope, farther into the thick of the forest, the great bear prowled, sniffing for rotted logs among a tangle of fallen trees. It heard the second shot, faint yet distinct, a sound foreign and unknown. The big body stopped moving, and the big head, unacquainted with fear in any form, rose and turned toward the sound. The bear waited, listening. Then the head lowered, and the long, straight foreclaws sank into the outer shell of a log, and seeming without effort, ripped it open. The tongue, surprisingly small in the big mouth, licked quickly at the scurrying insects and slowed to take the sluggish, wriggling white grubs. The man worked steadily with his knife, quartering the elk carcass. He had already bled and dressed it. He lifted one of the forequarters, testing the weight, and set it aside. He began to cut poles on which to hang the remaining quarters until he could return with the burro. The small of his back ached from bending over, and he straightened to rest it, and as his head came up, he caught the first faint tang in the air. His body stiffened, and the tiny premonitions running through him tightened in awareness. Smoke. Smoke drifting over the forest ceiling and filtering down fine tendrils that could elude the eye, but not the nose. The man stood motionless, testing the breeze. It stirred gently, barely whispering through the branches above him. Disregarding the rest of the meat, he hoisted the one forequarter to a shoulder and steadied it with one hand, and took the rifle with the other. He started at a right angle to the direction of the breeze, straight up the slope, the shortest path to the edge of the forest and the open parkland. Steadily he hammered on, and the breeze freshened and talked in the branches, and smoke began weaving among the tree trunks from the left. He angled toward the right, still climbing, and the smoke thickened, seeming to come from ahead as well as from the left. And at last he stopped. Can you get comfortable? Do you need me to move that? Sorry, I have to accommodate my cat. There, is that big enough now? Sorry. You have a big butt, Steve. It's okay. All right. Steadily he hammered on, and the breeze freshened and talked in the branches, and smoke began weaving among the tree trunks from the left. He angled toward the right, still climbing, and the smoke thickened, seeming to come from ahead as well as from the left, and at last he stopped, listening between the labored rush of his own breathing. The breeze strengthened, and was a wind sighing high overhead, and faint and far he could hear. Not so much heard as sensed, the sullen roar of the racing fire. Around him he could fairly feel the hurrying of panic, the small life of the forest moving, unseen but known, past him down the slope. A deer bounded out of the smoke and saw him and swerved and was gone. He lowered his shoulder, and the meat slid to the ground, and without hesitation he turned and struck down the slope. The smoke thickened, and the light dimmed strangely, and the roar rose until it was clearly audible, and a high crackling breaking over it. And in a short while he was running, using his free hand to help him vault fallen logs, stumbling often and driving downward. The ground leveled, and the trees ended, and he broke through bushes and tripped full length into the shallow shore waters of a lake. The rifle leaped from his hand and disappeared beneath the surface, and he scrambled after it, but the water deepened suddenly a few feet out, and he floundered, with his chest heaving for air. He struggled back to the shallow edge and stood quietly while his lungs eased their frantic labor. Smoke rolled around him, and he kneeled to keep his head close to the water and the layer of clear air just above it. Fire flared on the rim of the forest to the right and moved toward him, and the heat grew until it drove him into the deeper water. He stood stretched upward with his head alone above the surface and looked out over the lake through the rolling smoke clouds. 50 yards from shore, a huge rock showed, humping out of the water like the low-ridged back of some vast immobile beast. He swam slowly to it, fighting the drag of his clothes and boots, and crawled up on it and lay flat, while his tired muscles jumped and nodded and relaxed to rest. The man lay on the rock and watched the fire work its way along the shore. He saw flames spire swiftly up one tree and leap to the next, and sometimes, driven by the surge of their own tremendous draft, lunge to engulf several trees at once. The roar of the burning drowned out all possible other sound. It was nothing heard, little more than a slight prickling on the back of his neck that turned his eyes to the water past the other end of the rock. Only the broad head showed, with the muzzle cutting the water, as the great bear swam toward the rock. Quietly the man slipped into the water, stretching out in it with one hand holding to the stone, while the other took the knife from its sheath on his belt. Silent in the water, he saw the bear's head rise over the rock opposite him, not more than 20 feet away, the forepaws stretch for footing, the massive shoulders emerge into view. He watched the bear turn broadside and shake and send the drops spattering clear across the rock. He watched it settle on its haunches, facing the flaming shoreline, and let its forepaws slide forward until the broad belly rested on the rock and the big head sank on them. He moved cautiously to look out over the rest of the lake. Through the clear area just over the surface, he saw that it was almost ringed with fire, and there was no other haven showing above the water. He turned his head back to the rock, and his body stiffened. The bear was looking at him. Its head was raised and swung toward him, and the small eyes watched. His knees began to flex under him for a swift thrust outward from the rock, but the bear remained motionless, and while he waited, taut in tenseness, he saw the big mouth open and stretch in a yawn, and the white of the great teeth, and the lips drawing lazily back, and the muzzle crinkling. The jaws closed, and the head swung away and dropped on the forepaws again. The hot air, uncomfortable but not unendurable, beat against the man's face, and the chill of the water sank into his body. What is going on back there? It's a bear, I'm sure. Cautiously, he reached and put the knife between his teeth and placed both hands on the rock and began to draw himself forward and up on it. The bear's head rose and swung toward him, and the small eyes watched. He waited, and the bear did not move, and he inched forward until at last he was on his hands and knees on the rock. Slowly he shifted position until he was sitting cross-legged, ready for an instant scrambling push striking into the water. The bear watched, and when he was settled, the big head swung straight again and sank down. Gradually, the man's muscles softened, and the instant alertness eased out of them. The hot air dried his clothes, and the fingers holding the knife, now in his right hand, relaxed. The smoke clouds rolled and made a strange, unnatural dusk, and the fire roared through it along the shore. The man's back and buttocks ached with the strain of his position on the hard rock. Slowly he shifted again, until he was stretched full length on his side with his face toward the bear and his head pillowed on his left arm. The bear's ears twitched upright, but the big head did not move, and in a moment the ears eased limp again. The heat in the air lessened slightly, and the fire roared, dwindling along the shore. Far off it reached the edge of the gorge of the stream running out of the valley, and sought to leap across, and failed, and fell back and was content with the timber it had taken, held now within the limits of the ravine where it had started behind this and the open parkland above, and the gorge cutting down the long slope ahead of it, and the beginnings of the open rocky climb below where the first ridge of the eastward mountain barrier thrust upward in the new ascent. The sun, hidden behind the smoke clouds, dropped behind the westward heights, and the remaining flames around the lake sent weird lights dancing in the murky dark over the water. The man's eyes closed and opened abruptly, and closed again, and at last remained closed. The wind died, and the smoke trailed away in wisps, and the high stars wheeled in the clearing sky above the two silent figures pinpointed together on their rock in the heart of the soaring immensity of the timeless mountains. The man woke suddenly in the gray dawn of light before sunrise. He had rolled over in his sleep on his back, and the knife had slipped from his open hand. As awareness flooded him, he fought the stiffness in his muscles to turn quickly on his side and fumble for the knife handle. The seeking fingers halted before they found it. The rock stretched away from him, empty and open to the sky. The bear was gone. He pushed to his feet and stooped to take the knife and stood straight. The sound of splashing water turned his head toward the near shore. The bear was emerging from the lake onto a short, sandy spit. Against the background of rising slope with charred trunks thrusting above blackened floor and thin wisps of smoke still spiraling lazily, it was a miracle of enduring life, enormous and indomitable in the half-light and defiance of the barren desolation. It started inland and drew back with quick mincing steps. There were hot embers under the ashes and flames ready to break forth, flickering strong in many places at the push of any breeze. It started to the right along the shore, picking its way in the shallow water. It moved along the shoreline 300 yards and more and turned inland and disappeared almost in the instant of turning. The man slipped into the water and swam to the sandy spit. Working from there, he made systematic forays into the deeper water until he found his rifle. He washed away the bottom muck and broke it open to blow the barrel and firing chamber clean. Shivering in the first rays of the sun, he moved along the shoreline as the bear had done, stepping slowly but swinging his arms vigorously to warm his muscles. Where the bear had turned, he came on a narrow gorge that sliced down the slope to the lake edge, with rocky walls guarding a small stream. The fire had done little damage here because there was little to burn, and it had leaped over to race on around the lake. The man started the climb, still traveling slowly, and he nodded to himself when he came on the big tracks and soft spots among the bottom stones. Hidden in an aspen thicket a short way out on the parkland above the stricken forest, the great bear stood over the carcass of a white-tailed doe that had fallen in the flight of fear into the upper gorge and broken its neck. The bear had dragged the carcass to the open of the parkland and into the thicket. The big head lifted, and the small eyes peered through the thicket. The man was passing 60 yards away. A low rumble sounded into the bear's throat, soft and deep, not audible to the man and not meant to be. He strode on with the tireless stride of a man long used to the mountains. The bear watched him, its head turning slowly to follow his passing, and when his figure grew small in the distance, the big head dropped to feed again. I think that's probably the first bit of fiction that I've read that has no dialogue. I'm trying to think, did the guys in the store didn't really talk to each other? It just kind of talked about what they were talking about. August. All right, you guys, get settled. In the clear light of early morning, the man stood by the pool and looked at the shallow pan in his hands. The bottom of it was almost covered with the dull gleaming flakes. The pool silt had become richer as he worked deeper into it. He took the leather pouch from a pocket and shook the flakes into it. This was his third panning of the morning, and already the pouch was full. He went to his camp and behind it among the trees and stopped by a flat stone. He heaved at the stone to raise one side and braced it against one leg while he set a piece of stout branch to prop it up. In a hollow underneath lay a 5-pound salt bag filled to plumpness and another partly filled. He emptied the pouch into the second bag and lowered the stone into place. He went back by the pool and stood, slapping the pan gently against his thigh while he looked out over the valley. The air was fresh on his face, and mystic cloud shadows wandered on the mountain wall at the head of the valley. He dropped the pan on the sandbar and took the rifle from the grass bank and strode off down the valley with the sun warm on his face. He was close to the valley entrance, where the big boulders of an ancient rock slide had rolled out to become bedded in the ageless sod, where he met the bear, suddenly coming toward him around one of the rocks. The bear stopped, and the man stopped, 30 feet apart. Slowly the man swung up the rifle so that his left hand could grip the barrel, and his right forefinger slipped around the trigger. The bear watched him, and the low rumble, soft and deep, formed in its throat. Slowly the man stepped to the left, moving in a half circle, always facing the bear, yielding the right of way. The bear watched him, turning its head to follow him until its neck was arched around. When he completed the half circle, the man deliberately turned from the bear, and his will clamped hard on his muscles to hold them to a steady walk away. When he had traveled some 40 feet, he looked back. The bear had gone forward on its own way, and its big, ridiculously tiny-tailed rump was toward him as it overturned scattered stones and sniffed for the scuttling insects. 5 hours later, in the early afternoon, the man returned to his camp, backpacking the dressed carcass of a small white-tailed buck. Across the valley, the great bear lay on the ledge and watched him. He could see it there, a dark shape on the stone, while he skinned the deer and pegged out the hide for drying. He built a big fire of dry wood, and while he waited for it to burn down to glowing embers, he began cutting the meat into strips. He looked across the valley and saw the bear rise and disappear into the dark recess of the crevice, and he nodded to himself. He knew its habits now. Always when it was in this part of its range, it fed at night and in the early morning hours. By mid-morning, it was lying on the ledge. When the sun was high overhead, sliding into the afternoon slant, it sought the cool darkness of the rock depth. The man raised poles in a rack over the fire and hung the strips of meat on it. He piled green wood on the fire and retreated from the smoke and sat resting with his back against a tree, looking out across the valley. The dropping sun glinted on the pan lying on the sandbar, but the man remained still against his tree, rising at long intervals to replenish his fire. The stream gathered speed as it left the valley and skipped in stony steps down past the edge of the burned-out forest, where new green was beginning to rise above the blackened ground. It dropped, gaining momentum into the deepened gorge that took it farther down, and where it raced and whirled in rock pools and raced on. The man stood on the low cliff overlooking the gorge. 35 feet below him, the great bear lay beside the stream. Its new coat was lengthening, and a pale silvery cast was beginning to touch the tips of the thick-grown hairs. It lay limp and relaxed on the pebble strand. Suddenly, a forepaw darted and flipped a fat trout, flashing through the air, and the bear leaped from its lying position to seize the fish as it landed flopping a dozen feet away. Lazily, the bear fed, then wandered up the stream to where a smooth rock slanted straight into the water. Standing at the top of the slant, it gave a small bounce and went forward on its belly on the rock, with legs outstretched, and slid splashing into the stream. The man leaned over the cliff to watch, and a soundless chuckle shook him. Lazily, the bear climbed again to the top of the smooth rock and rolled over on its back and slid down, tail first, thick legs waving. Its rump struck the water with a spattering smack, and the chuckle in the man grew into sound. The bear whirled and rose in the water and looked up. It looked away and inspected the opposite bank in plain pretense that the man was not there. Its head dropped, and it shuffled away down the gorge and out of sight around the first turn. Farther to the eastward, far over the mountain barrier, only a few men worked by the shallow pools that were all that remained of the stream flowing there in the spring and early summer. Most of the cabins were sinking into ruins, and only a few tents remained. Under the tarpaulin roof of the store and bar, several men argued the failure of prospecting trips into the surrounding country. The storekeeper, short and thick, with deep, burnt-out eyes and a round bullet head, stood at one end of his bar listening to the low voice of the hatchet-faced man with the thin-lipped mouth. He looked about at his scantily stocked shelves and shrugged his shoulders. Greed and bitterness and discouragement crawled through the mining camp. Quiet against the sky, the man stood on the first ridge outside the valley and saw, small in the vast panorama below him, the great bear stalking an elk. It slipped upwind along a dry gulch and crept out to the shelter of a shrub thicket. The elk grazed closer, and the bear broke from the thicket. The elk wheeled into flight, legs driving with the strength of terror, but the bear overtook it and was alongside and reared a paw, flashed in a blur of motion beyond vision, and struck the elk's head sideways and snapped the neck like a twig breaking. There had been a stillness, a flash of movement, then stillness again. The motionless body of the elk on the grass, and the bear standing beside it. The man watched the bear feed slowly, then drag the carcass into the gulch and scoop a hole in the soft shale and pull the carcass into this and begin covering it. A small grim smile touched his lips. He turned and started down the other side of the ridge to hunt in another part of the wilderness empire he shared with the great bear. The chill of the night lingered, gradually giving way to the sun's warmth. The morning air was crystal in its distinct clarity. The man stood by the pool and looked at the pan in his hands. There were only a few scattered flakes in it. The pool was almost worked out. He started to walk along the stream, studying its flow and occasional silt banks. His steps slowed and at last stopped, and he looked out over the valley. New color was showing on the clumps of low bushes that dotted the valley floor. Berries were ripening there and along the climbing sides of the valley. Far by the opposite slope, he saw the bear rise out of the bushes, settling back on its haunches like a big sitting squirrel, stripping berries into its mouth with its long foreclaws. He strode back to his camp and tossed the pan to one side and lifted the flat stone. 3 full salt bags lay there now, and a 4th partly filled. He emptied the leather pouch into the 4th bag and lowered the stone in place. Rifle in hand, he wandered out through his side of the valley, tasting berries along the way. September. The green of the valley was changing. darker with a brown cast and barely discernible splotches. The thin cutting edge of fall was invading the air. Among the trees behind the man's camp, the flat stone lay undisturbed, with grass blades curling over it. The camp itself was neat and orderly. Firewood was stacked in a long pile. A little to one side the pan lay, no longer glinting bright, spotted with dirt and rust. Where the tree fringe abutted the open of the valley, the man sat, cross-legged in the sun. Across his lap was a deerskin, tanned with lye from wood ashes and worked to fairly smooth flexibility. Carefully he sliced into the leather, cutting doubled patterns for moccasins to replace his worn boots. Across the valley, working along the base of the slope and up a short way, the great bear was digging for ground squirrels, ripping into the soil several feet with a half-dozen powerful strokes and lying flat on its belly for the final scraping thrust. The increasing richness of the fur with its silver tipping shone in the clear light. Alternately, the man bent to his cutting and raised his head to watch the bear. Suddenly, with the suddenness of decision, he rose and strode back among the spruce and juniper and about until he found a level space between the trees to his liking. Here he laid out a rough rectangle, scratching the lines with his boot heel. He marked off space inside for a bunk and another rectangle, small and against one end of the other, for a fireplace. He studied his design and nodded to himself and looked around, estimating the standing timber close by. He strode to his shelter and crawled to the low end to inspect what remained of his staple supplies. He came out carrying a small pack and closed the open end of the shelter with its log barrier. He strode to the flat stone and filled the leather pouch from one of the bags. A few moments later he was striding eastward out of the valley with the rifle in one hand, the lead rope of the burro in the other. A cool wind whipped down the valley, whispering of the winter still hidden far up in the soaring peaks. It moved over the changing green that was darker, with the brown splotches plainer and spreading. It moved out the valley entrance and down the rolling slope where the man strode steadily forward, facing straight into it. He was leading a loaded pack horse now, and the burdened burro trotted behind. At the crest of the slope he stopped and searched his back trail for long minutes. His head rose higher, and his stride lengthened as he passed through the valley entrance, and the horse and the burro followed. 3 miles away on the ridge overlooking the last slope, 10 feet back in the timber that topped the ridge, 2 men stood in the tree shadows and watched the 3 figures entering the valley. The taller of the 2, lean even in his thick Mackinaw jacket, had a narrow hatchet face gashed by a thin-lipped mouth. The other, short but bulking thick from shoulders to hips, had burnt-out eyes and a round bullet head. The thin-lipped one snapped his fingers and nodded to the other. Together they went back deeper into the timber and mounted the 2 horses there, and rode out and down the ridge, circling to the right toward the high shoulder of climbing rock that would give them a view out over the valley. Restless on its rock ledge, the great bear lay on the stone and watched the empty camp across the valley. Its ears twitched, and the big head rose and swung to the right. It saw the man entering the valley, and the horse and burro following. It saw the man stop and look toward it and wave his arm and start forward again. The low rumbling, soft and deep, rolled out from the ledge and died away in the afternoon wind. Quietly, the bear watched the man stride toward his camp and begin untying the packs. Quietly it rose and padded on the stone into the darkness of the crevice. Vigor flowed through the man. The afternoon air of his valley flooded his muscles with strength. His axe leaped in his hands, and he felled 4 trees on the right foundation size and lopped away the branches and cut the logs to the lengths he wanted and notched them. Using the axe handle for a measure, he took 3 pieces of rope and used the 3-4-5 rule to square the corners as he fitted the logs together. As he straightened from checking the fourth joint, he saw first the heavy boots, and as his eyes swept upward, he saw the small, wicked muzzle of the rifle bearing on his belly, and the thin-lipped gash of a mouth in the narrow face. The two men wasted no time. They asked their questions, and when he did not answer, they roped him to a thick tree. They searched through his camp and came back by him and built a fire. And when this was blazing strong, they took his rifle and emptied the magazine and laid it with the barrel reaching into the flames and waited for the metal to heat. The man stood tight against the tree, and the pale hazel of his eyes was startling against the dead, bloodless brown of his broad, wind-burned face. He stared out over the valley, and his gaze moved upward and stopped 200 yards up the opposite slope, and the beginning of living color crept into his face. The muscles along his jaw were ridged hard, and he waited, cautious in his cunning, until the hot steel was close to his flesh before he spoke. He spoke quickly and bobbed his head toward the far slope. The two others turned. They saw the ledge and the uneven dark outline of the crevice. They spoke briefly together, and the burnt-eyed one swung abruptly and started across the valley, and the thin-lipped one sat hump-kneed in the ground and picked up his rifle and set it across his lap. The man tight against the tree and the thin-lipped one hump-kneed on the ground watched the other move out and across the valley floor. They saw him stop at the base of the opposite side and look around for the trail and find it. They saw him start up, hurrying now, and reach the ledge, almost running, and disappear into the crevice. Time passed, and they watched, each in his own intentness, and nothing moved across the way. The ledge under its overhanging rock slept in its own quietness in the afternoon sun. The thin-lipped one rose and unloosened the rope holding the man to the tree, and ordered him ahead, and prodded him in the small of the back with the rifle. The man led, and the thin-lipped one followed, and they started across the valley floor. Deep in the crevice darkness, the great bear stood over the crumpled body. The big head with the small eyes, red-rimmed now, swung slowly from side to side. The sound of running steps had brought it from sleep into instant alertness. The forward leap out of the inner darkness into the dimness near the crevice entrance, and the incredibly swift slashing stroke of forepaw had been instinctive reactions to the challenging affront of invasion. Silently it had dragged the body back into the protective darkness and stepped over it, facing the entrance. The scent of the body, familiar yet unfamiliar, rose in its nostrils, and caution at an experience never before known held it waiting in the darkness, listening for further sound out beyond the rock opening. Striding steadily, the man led the way up the trail. His face was a fixed mask, and his muscles bunched in tight tension. When the bear broke from the crevice, red-rimmed eyes blinking for swift focus in the sunlight, the man leaped sideways off the trail and down the steep slope, falling and rolling over the sharp rocks and hard against the trunk of a sturdy spruce. He scrambled to his feet and jumped for the first limb and swung his legs into the trunk and began climbing. Above him, on the trail, the thin-lipped one swung up the rifle and fired, and the bullet thudded into the bear's left shoulder and scraped the bone and bore back along the side under the skin. In a silent rush, the great bear drove down the trail, and the thin-lipped one screamed and turned to run, and a crashing forepaw crushed his spine forward into his breastbone and raked, tearing down through the muscles of his back. The big jaws closed on the already lifeless body and shook it and flung it 20 feet away. Close against the trunk, the man peered through the thick tranches of the spruce. Below him, the great bear quartered the ground like a huge dog on a hunt, moving with a silent, flowing deadliness, raising its head often to test the wind. It limped slightly, favoring its left foreleg, and the recurrent pain from the flesh wound in the shoulder swelled the steady rage within and brightened the reddened rims of the eyes. It worked back along the trail near the valley floor and looked across the man's camp. Abruptly it swung with steady purpose. Abruptly it swung and with steady purpose went up the trail to the ledge and passed along the slope side and faded into the tangled growth near the head of the valley. Safe in his spruce, the man watched it go and disappear from his sight. He waited. At last he climbed to the ground and scrambled up to the trail and grabbed the rifle there. Quickly he ejected the spent cartridge shell and pumped another cartridge into the firing chamber. Quickly he checked the magazine and saw it was almost full. Cautious and alert, he slipped down and started across the valley. The pack horse and burro grazed by the camp, quiet now, after the brief startling from the single shot across the way. In the fringe of trees behind them and around the camp, nothing stirred except the wind whispering its endless summer murmur through the evergreen branches. As the man approached downwind, he stopped often to peer forward and swing his head to scan the whole long fringe of trees, searching with his eyes every possible cover. It was the drumming of the horse's hooves as it pounded to the length of its picket rope and jerked around, strangling, that whirled him toward the sound. The great bear streaked toward him out of thicket shadow, and he fired in an instant, instinctively, aiming as rapidly as he could pump the gun. The first shot bored into the junction of the neck and right shoulder and shattered the bone there, and the second smashed into the massive breast and ripped back through the lungs. The great bear drove ahead, uneven in bounding stride, with a deep coughing tearing its throat, and the third shot struck through the mouth and back into the spine. The man leaped aside, and the bear took it past. The man leaped aside, and the bear's rush took it past, and it crumpled forward to the ground. The man stood by the bear's body and stared down. It was smaller with the life gone. The muscles of the man's shoulders shook a little, and he swung his head slowly from one side to the other, and the flat planes of his face were hard as the rock formations ringing the valley. He stood by the rectangle of notched logs a long time. Quietly he turned and went to the flat stone and took the plump salt bags from under it and carried them over by his shelter and began to prepare his packs. Half an hour later he strode across the valley floor, and the pack horse and the burro followed. The sun dropping below the far peaks was behind him. The chill rising wind beat against his back. Unbelievably small in the vastness, he strode out of the valley, and with him went a new loneliness and a sense of something lost. Oh, that's the end of that one. Well, I'm hoping for some dialogue. What do you guys think? I'm looking here to see. Looks like the next one's got some dialogue. We'll see how much. Doesn't look like much. And I'll skim through these. But let me know if you liked it. If not, it's super descriptive. He's very poetic in his writing, which I love. And the description seemed a little tedious at first, but as I got into it, I liked it more. So we'll see how this goes. You were hoping the bear was his buddy. So was I, Cara Dune. I was really upset when he had to shoot the bear. I'm like, man, I was hoping the bear was going to take out the two guys and then he would be okay, but it didn't work out that way. I guess it was silly of us. We've watched too much Chicks on the Right. We had it in our head that the bear might be his buddy. But to be fair, Jess and Shane, the lead character, had the wolf as his friend. What was the wolf's name? Shadow. So kind of hoping he would go that route, but he didn't, did he? Dang it. Welcome, Mackie. I think you're new to the chat. People following us from where? I don't know where these people have come from, but welcome to you. And I love seeing my dad on Facebook. Hi, Dad. I love you. You would love a wolf friend. We see that here some in Kentucky. They have people have wolf hybrids. I've not seen it a lot, but I've seen it some. Chris Williams, sorry I'm late. Morning, Penny. Morning, everyone. Morning, Chris. So that is, hi, Penny's dad. I'll put that one up on the screen for him to see if he's still watching. Probably dozed off while I was reading, knowing my dad. He will be, let me think, I'm going to be 54 on my birthday. So my dad will be 78 on his birthday. Isn't that crazy? I can't believe my dad's going to be 78. My mom's getting ready to turn, or my mom just turned 74. I don't think she'd care if I told you that. At Penny Whitbroad. Hello, Penny. Hello. But yeah, it's definitely different than anything else I've read fiction wise, because it seems like everything I've read fiction wise has had some dialogue. But I think that type of writing, that kind of poetic writing, is really well suited to short stories, don't you? I think if you had a whole book of that, it would wear you out. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know. Um, what the next chapters are like. I don't generally read ahead. I might look ahead in this one a little bit, so that we could maybe, if there are chapters that have more dialogue and more interaction between people, I might read out of order and put those in the middle to kind of break it up a little bit. But we'll see. The next book in that series was actually, hold on, I can tell you. Let me pull Kindle back up here. Let's go back. Close book. Shane. The next book was actually, and I went with the short stories. You enjoyed it, okay. America, I haven't seen you in forever. Okay, so good night. This guy's written a lot of books. So I think Shane is the last one. No, I think Shane is I don't know if these are in what order these are in, but there's Shane, and then the next one is Medicine Man and Sister's Keeper. But I went with this one because it was short stories, and we can finish one in a reading. And you don't have to keep it in your head to the next book. Hey, Jess. Good to see you, sweetheart. But there's that. So that's all I've got for you today. I will see you guys on Friday. If you watch Chicks on the Right on Thursday, Cara Dune will be moderating for me. Thank you so much, Cara Dune. She's one of our new mods on that show. If you don't watch Chicks on the Right, it's a great show. Also, Robert Goivea, Watching the Watchers, is a great show here on Rumble. And he's also, Chicks and Robert are both also on YouTube. But those are two great shows. Another one is Red Pill 78. If you don't watch Red Pill 78, he does news every day at 5, except Thursdays. And Thursdays you can watch my show. I do a show at 4:30 Eastern called the Nurse Penny Podcast, and it's topical. Is the sound cutting out? Oh, interesting. Mackie says, I've been subscribed for over a year, but not been receiving notifications. I came across you on another Rumble live stream, in case you're wondering. So, Mackie, just go in. How do you even do that? I think it's actually easier now. So, up at the top of the chat, you'll see your picture. If you're looking at it on a computer, you'll see it. And then next to it, there's a little bell, and you can hit that bell for notifications. I don't know if I don't see it anywhere else on the screen. I'm not on a phone, so I can't tell you where it is if you're watching on your phone. Thank you, Kara. Who am I going to see tomorrow? I think it's tomorrow wait a minute, maybe I Need You Friday. Shoot. Oh man, I hope I didn't get that day wrong. Dr. Clark is tomorrow. Oh crap, that's at 3. I don't need you tomorrow. I need you Friday. Friday at 9:15, I have the appointment with the electrophysiologist. So be praying on that. That's the doctor that wants to go in and do an ablation in my heart for an aberrant pacemaker that I've got. Everybody has multiple pacers in their heart naturally, and I've got one that is not supposed to be there, and it's shooting signals in a way that's messing with my heart. So I'm hoping I won't have to have that fixed. I'm just fingers crossed. He really wants to fix it. I'm kind of hoping I can talk him out of it. But it's called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. And because I have a history of atrial fib, it can cause sudden death. So that's why they want to fix it. I know that should be all I need to say to convince myself that I should have this thing done. Sudden death, let's get it fixed. I don't know. I'm just weird about somebody putting a thing in my groin and winding it up to my heart and burning stuff. makes me a little nervous. Um, I don't know. It looks good for me, Mackie. Maybe try refreshing. I'm not sure. Jess says, I keep forgetting the schedule too. Yeah, so it's 10:30 in the morning Eastern time on Wednesdays for book club, and then 4:30 in the afternoon on Fridays for the Nurse Penny podcast. And thank you for the prayers, guys. Yeah, Missouri Tim's like, yikes. Yeah, I know he does. He's one of the best, the doctor that I have, but there's just no teeny tiny part of me. That is weird. Why is that so far behind? There it is. Um, I just don't want people messing with my heart. I already have a pacemaker, um, because my rate will not. So pacemaker keeps your rate at a certain level. So my pacemaker is set to 60, which is where most people's are set. But my heart rate was, um, I had an incident where it dropped into the 20s, and so I had to have a pacemaker put in so I wouldn't die. And that's about the last thing I want done to my heart. Um, Kara, did you say you could do Friday? I'll message you if I don't see your response here. Mackie says, keeping up with the globalists are doing is proving time consuming and difficult. Yeah, yeah. I hate that we have to do that on the Friday shows. But I've been trying to mix up the Friday shows so that we do some fun stuff in there, cover some stupid news, cover a few things that I haven't seen covered during the week, so that we make sure to hit on those things or something that maybe has developed, you know, over that Friday, and we cover those things, and then we try to throw in some music and throw in some fun videos just to kind of give people a mental break from um, all of the ridiculous stuff. Okay, so what they do is it's like a heart cath, and so they go in through the vessel in the groin, and they just travel up that vessel to the heart, and then they start sending in electrical signals to cause my heart to misfire where it's misfiring, so they can find it because they're having a hard time finding where it is just with an EKG and stuff like that. So then when they find the areas that are misfiring, then they burn or freeze them, and that stops them from doing that. And then the signals go through the paths that they're supposed to go through. Um, my other option would be to get my pacemaker replaced with a pacemaker defibrillator, um, which I don't know. Just if my heart were like to go weird and I was to randomly be defibrillated, that's pretty freaky too. I don't know. I don't like any of it, to be honest, but hopefully they won't need to. Hopefully they'll get in there and say, oh, we were totally wrong and it looks fine. And that's what I'm hoping for. Um, just for Chicks on the Right as needed for Penny. Yeah, it's her first gig. Um, Chicks on the Right is my first moderating gig. I was participating there and I just couldn't stand it anymore because the trolls had taken over that chat. There were maybe two or three people that would try to chat, and then the trolls would just type fart for all of the characters that you can type into the little chat box and just hit it over and over and over and over again until no one could chat anymore. And I've not seen a chat that bad. Um, and so I had reached out to the chicks and was like, look, your chat is unusable. And it's very hard to build community on Rumble if your chat is unusable. And I said, look, I'm big on developing, building community and helping people build their chat up. I like to go into chats where people are just, have you been to those chats where people just, thank you, Kara. Have you been to those chats where people, just throw out comments, but they don't talk to each other, and it feels super disjointed in the chat? I see that on a lot of chats. And so sometimes I'll try to go into those chats and comment back to somebody who makes a comment so I can get people starting to talk to each other and connect. Because it's just weird to be in a chat and just see people just throwing out random comments, but they're not trying to connect with each other. Now, a lot of the fast chats like Bongino, Salty, um, those chats move so fast that you couldn't possibly have conversation. I prefer the chats, and I only participate in the chats where people are actually talking to each other, or where there's the potential for that. And where there's the potential for it and it's not happening, I try to get that going. Um, because I think I want good channels to have good chats, because I like supporting those content creators. And I feel like on Rumble here we're all a family. Robert Govea will always say, "Oh, if you've not seen Nurse Penny's show, she's next door and she's got a great show, and Viva Frey's got a great show, and we try to plug each other." Um, all the time on YouTube. Yeah, well, and I know a lot of the folks complain about the YouTube chats because they get censored so much. There's just so much you can't say. And that's not so much the case for Rumble. I have noticed that the girls have gone into the chat settings for Chicks on the Right, and they have put in some keywords there that will get your comment grayed out. And nobody will see it. And I think that's recent because there were some words I could say before that I can't say now in that chat. Um, yeah, Bongino, Crowder, Salty Cracker. You can't really participate in those chats unless you, um, not in that way, not conversationally. You can put comments up. So I'll go in occasionally to like Salty Cracker's chat if he's got like a medical thing, and I'll do a paid comment so he can see it. Um, you know, things like that. But that's about it. Yes, Mackie, I am a nurse. Mackie says, "You're a nurse, aren't you? Someone I know took dodgy jabs and is now getting high temperature. Any suggestions to bring temperature down?" Well, you need to investigate what's causing that high temperature. They need to have some labs done, a CBC, which is a complete blood count, a CMP, which is a complete metabolic panel, and see what's going on. Because there's a lot of things that can cause fever, immune dysregulation, things like that. What kind of fever are they having? I mean, if it's like a high fever and the CBC and the CMP are normal, and this is like a routine thing, I would suggest a CT for the head because the hypothalamus in the brain controls body temperature. And so I'd want to make sure there's nothing going on there. But I would definitely start with the CBC CMP and maybe blood cultures to see if they've got some kind of infection that's just simmering. Missouri Tim says, I used to run an incognito account alongside my chat account to see what YouTube censored. Oh, wow. Yeah, YouTube censors quite a bit. I've been on YouTube and, like, I think I used the word that somebody was being, a PUSSY, and I got dinged. It wouldn't let me post that. And then I think I said somebody was being a dick, and I think I don't know if it's dependent on the chat or if that's a YouTube thing. See, here on Rumble, it's dependent on the chat. Like, I don't have any language other than the word fart limited on, I don't even know if I've got that one limited on my, for my chatters. And I'm trying to think if I did that one. I might have just to catch that person that's doing that repeatedly, but I don't have a whole lot of words blocked. You can say just about anything here. Emoji spammers, yeah, I don't like those either. Or the one, Dan Bongino and Tucker Carlson have an affair. Check out this link, or that one always gets me. Or the one, there's somebody that's always pushing a link for some kind of earbuds, and I'm like, really, is this? Like, I would never hit the link, so I don't know for sure, but I don't know if that person really is desperately trying to, market their earbuds, or if that's like some kind of scary link that you shouldn't touch. So I just don't do anything with it besides block them. Where are you? In UK, we're being invaded by illegal immigrants arriving at Dover by boats. Oh, wow. Yikes. I mean, we're being invaded here too. Tim says the booster gave me heart flutter. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it'll do that. And you might want to get that checked with a cardiologist. Can't type hoe shorts in YouTube. Well, dang it. I use that term so much. That's going to really be crippling for me. I can make Russian trolls. You guys are so silly. I love you. Mackie says, yes, I get frustrated people not communicating in the chats. I avoid, yeah, it's really weird because you'll get in there and somebody will just throw out a random comment that's related to whatever the content creator is talking about. But then like if you reply to their comment and say, hey, good point, or, I wondered that myself, they won't answer you back. They only talk at the screen, which is just, I don't know. I just think it's weird. So I'll go in and I'll give it a try to see if I can comment and get people talking to each other. But then if I can't, I give up because I don't have time for all that. But I would like to see some of the chats, like LFA TV has some chats that aren't really people talking back and forth. It's just comments at the content creator who's not really looking at your comments unless you're doing a paid comment. It's funny because I think a lot of people think that the content creators read the chat. Most of them don't because it's really hard to keep up with the chat and do a show. I read all of them. and I try to make sure that everybody sees them. I try to pull them up on the screen, not during book club so much, but during the week, during the Friday show. But I feel like the show is very much a collaboration. And I think it's just a weird thing we have on this channel, maybe, where I go back and forth a lot with the chatters and talk to them. And they just add a lot. It's just funny. The comments are funny. I'm like, why would you not include that? Because it helps expand your content, and I don't have to do anything but read the comment. So I like that back and forth, that sense of it's just a bunch of us friends hanging out talking about the stupid news of the day. And that's just the kind of I don't know. I kind of like that sort of we're all sitting around a fire having drinks and talking. I like that feel. Um, Tim says, I hate people that come in who are instantly negative. Yeah, the black pilled folks. Um, I've actually blocked a few of those on chicks just because, not because they're black pilled, but because they are aggressively going after anybody who thinks differently than they do. They're just coming in to stir crap and try to get people upset. And I just feel like that ruins the community, so they have to go. Like if they were in my yard doing that, we were all sitting around talking, I would have Don make them leave. So that's kind of how I handled a chat room as well. I have to confess, though, I do inject the emojis. Well, injecting emojis is different than spamming with emojis, like botting them. That's a lot. Not 200 at a time. Exactly, Tim. Jess is in Arkansas by the heart of the beast, 15 minutes from Walmart headquarters. Arkansas is as corrupted as it gets. Arkansas is crazy. We lived in Texas, and when I was a kid and a teenager, and we would hear a lot of stories about the stuff that goes on in Arkansas. Can an individual chatter block and rumble? You cannot. They don't have that feature yet. Well, I can't tell because I'm doing the content, but last I checked, which has been like in the last month, no, you can't block, which is unfortunate. I'm hoping they get to that. See, that's what the chicks were telling me. They're like, no, we don't need a moderator. Just block the people you don't want to hear from. And they didn't even realize there was a chat on Rumble. And so they're like, wow, we didn't realize we had a chat. And I'm like, you do. It's non-existent because nobody can talk in it, but you could have one if we would get rid of these bots. And she's like, well, just block them. And I said, you can't. As an individual chatter, you can't block them. Only a moderator or the content channel owner can do, or the channel owner can do that. So then I got him to agree to let me moderate. I'm like, please, it's killing your reach over here. Mackie says, thank you. They said their doctor stopped their blood pressure tablets too. Isn't strange to stop those. And what depends on what the blood pressure was. A lot of people who get the jabs start having issues with low blood pressure, POTS syndrome. It's called postural orthostatic tachycardic syncope or syndrome. I've heard it both ways. And they can have episodes where their blood pressure is dropping when they stand up and they get dizzy. In a lot of cases, as long as their blood pressure is mostly stable, they'll stop the meds for that. Yeah, we were hidden, Kara. You couldn't, you'd see fart, 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 fart for like 20 messages. And then you'd see somebody's comment, and then you'd see 20 more comments that were just that word over and over again. It was crazy. Missouri Tim says I had 400 some blocks when I was in YouTube. So they have a lot of trolls over there too. I didn't realize. Jess says, I don't even know how to block. Well, you can't block here, sweetie. Jess says, I figure free speech, they'll stop eventually, but they don't. The trolls don't stop. The bots don't stop. It's awful. And it totally kills the chat. That's why we block them. Not because if you want to have like free speech and actually come in like a human and talk, that's absolutely fine. But if you're just coming in to stir shit or to destroy the chat, then you got to go. Mackie says, do you wish to block me already? Can you explain on normal comments section, please? I think in YouTube, you can just click on that person, their name or their icon, and just block them. Yeah, there are. Well, what was funny is when I started moderating on chicks, those bots came after me on my own channel. They're like, oh, she's got a channel. We'll just go there and start. And so they started showing up in the chat, and I had to block them. I mean, these people obviously have nothing to do with their time. I don't know who they are, and I don't know how you derive so much pleasure from just being an asshole. It's shocking to me. Like, I find it just as easy to be kind and gracious to people. And so I just don't understand, like, what kind of messed up brain do you have that's your idea of a fun morning? Um, yeah, Kara, they no one could communicate, and they would just create a new account. So I would get them blocked over on Chicks on the Right, and they'd already have new accounts in the wings waiting, so they could come right back in, and you just gotta gun them all down. Um, Troll bashing is fun. If you've just got somebody in the chat who's just casually trolling, that can be fun. Um, the bot type stuff is just insufferable. You can't have a chat with it. Um, Jess says, I don't know how you guys, I'm not playing. Kara says, Penny, I'll make a Rick roll so when they come to spam me, they get nowhere. Kara, can you do Friday for me on Chicks? I don't need Thursday, actually. I need Friday. I have 2 appointments this week, and the one that's at 9 a.m. is on Friday. I got it backwards. Um, if not, they'll just not have a mod for the day, and then they'll miss us when we get back. They'll be like, oh, wow, we're so glad you guys are back. We were abused. Yes, ma'am, I shot you a text. Okay, thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate it. Tim says, no misogyny attendant, but I crazed 40-something gal that lives on chat 24/7 can make chatting. Oh, a crazed 40-something gal that lives on chat 24/7 can make chatting pure hell. Oh, you're not wrong. Big Bear Highway 59. Hi, you're new. Penny, is Laetrile a real treatment for cancer? I would have to research that. I don't know. Depending on the kind of cancer, um, I would Google ivermectin and cancer. I'm going to type this in so you guys can see it. Kara says yes. I've not done any research into that. I don't know. Ivermectin and cancer. Let me put that up on the screen. Hold on, I'm waiting for my screen to roll here. And then put in fembendazole and cancer. Geez, that one's taking a minute. Hold on. I just wanted you to be able to see the spelling. Fembendazole. Those are both antiparasitic drugs that are showing great efficacy with cancer. The other thing, depending on where the cancer is, if it's prostate, testicular, breast, thyroid, I would research Lugol's iodine in cancer. Lugol's iodine. That one's going to be hard to find stuff on. Iodine and cancer. A lot of times what you'll get is like radiographic iodine. So that one's a little harder to find. But if you're going to look at, talk to your doctor about those sorts of therapies. I don't know if they'll know anything about them, sadly, but I've been doing a lot of research. Jess says, I'm 47, work from home, and this is my social life. The kids, dog's house. It's the only time I have. Oh, well, we're glad to be part of that. Yeah, as long as you're not crazed. Yeah, look into that, Big Bear, and let me make a note. I know I had a pen here because I wrote down Gypsy's prayer request. My cats are bad to knock them down. Okay. Laetrile. I know I've heard of this, and I know I've read about it. I'm just totally drawing a blank. For cancer. Okay, I've got that one. I'll look into that. Jess is like the cool older hand. So we will be, we'll still be here. I'll still post a show we're gone July 7th through the 12th. So I'll post a show that week at the Wednesday book club, but you can get on and watch it, but there won't be a live chat. And then there's some dates in August. I can't remember when those are. I'll have to look. But I'll let you know about those closer to time. And then I'll have to see what we're going to do about the Friday shows on those weeks. But other than that, we're just on our regular schedule. Yeah, I pretty much have the same social life. I have to go take my big bike to the FedEx today to send back to the people because the thing is not, I have an e-bike and the monitor thing on it's not working right. So we have to send it back and they're going to refund it. And Don's ordered me a different bike. So hopefully that'll be here Monday. Yeah, I'm a homebody too. Don really loves like going out and being around people. I think that might be a mental illness. I haven't quite decided. I'm fine once I get out, but I really struggle to get out. I don't know. I just find groups of people exhausting. Like Don likes to go to the mall and people watch. I don't that's surely there's a medication we could get him for that. Axitinib is what they prescribed for kidney cancer. Keeps me very bedridden and ill. Kidney cancer. Hold on. Kidney cancer. Do you have your staging? Like, do you know how far advanced it is, Big Bear? Um, Gardening, cooking, dogs, and chatting. 10 minutes from the Missouri border. Well, Jess, Mackie says, thank you. I didn't want to really, but I advised they call an ambulance and tell them they had dodgy jabs and to get, yeah, I mean, if you're constantly running, I mean, he needs to go to the family doctor and get a workup done. There's only so much they can do in the ER. Um, Doctors stopping their BP tablets. Yeah, you're not going to get a whole lot of help from the ER on regular meds and stuff. It's just not what they're designed for. Um, but you can always get a different doctor. Hermit like the dude in the book. Oh, yeah. I get to go to Missouri, save a lot of money on grocery taxes, and weed is legal. Weed's legal in Missouri? I did not know that. It's getting ready. I think by fall it's supposed to be legal medicinally here in Kentucky. Oh, you're in Sedalia. I know where Sedalia is. I lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, and I lived in Lee Summit, Missouri, and somewhere else. I can't remember. I've lived in a lot of places. You're stage 3, okay. And what are you taking? I wanted to go back and look at that. Now I'm not going to be able to find it. AXITINI. Oh, so you're doing a AXITINIB. You're doing a what are those called? Biologic. Bella Vista, Arkansas. Have I noticed less trolls on Rumble as it's organized as group chats? Better, isn't it? Well, I think a lot of us are moderating. So I've got a couple mods for my channel. They're not always here, usually here on Fridays, but not always here on Wednesdays. We don't seem to have as much trouble on Wednesdays for some reason as we do on Fridays. But I think a lot of people, just as a content creator, I can just slide over here to your name and click the little 3 dots to the right that I see. And I don't know if you guys see those dots, but I can click them and then I can mute you. And so it's pretty easy for me to do. It's just hard if I'm reading like an article or something. So I'll be reading an article and I'm not even seeing that somebody's botting up the chat. And so then one of my mods will hit it for me. I just went to the weed shop yesterday, said Tim. It beats Disney. See, I could not be a regular user of that because I would weigh 500 pounds. Ivermectin apparently cures some cancers. Yeah, so does fenbendazole. What is the guy's name? Do you guys know the name of the guy? He had, what was it, like stage 4 prostate cancer? Joe. I'll find it. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Stage 4. Joe prostate. What is his name? Anyway, he's got a blog that he does that talks about how he beat stage 4. I don't know if it's prostate or pancreatic cancer. But anyway, beat stage 4 using fenbendazole, which, I mean, he's using the pet version because the people version, I think, is called membendazole. But he was using the pet version, and he totally got himself into remission. Yeah, there's a lot on ivermectin, and you can type in ivermectin cancer scholarly articles. Now, granted, they're going to be hard to read if you're not medical, but just go to the end part. What do they call that? I don't know why I can't think of it. It's not the summary. Results. Just go to the results section and look at that. That's easier than trying to weed through a whole study. I wish we had weed shops, says Mackie. It's still illegal in the UK. Really? I don't know why I assumed it would be legal there. If you get caught smoking it, you could be evicted from your home. What if you own your home? Stopped pills. Big Bear says, I stopped the pills on the next day. Much better. No pills for 3 days. Feel much better. Yeah, it's, that's the bad thing about cancer is the treatment is just crippling for so many people. They have so much pain from the cancer drugs themselves. Um, I've had a couple friends that had breast cancer that was the triple negative breast cancer. And I mean, they were dead in months. And it was the treatment that killed them. It wasn't the cancer. It was just awful. I mean, the cancer probably would have gotten them eventually. This was before I even knew about fenbendazole and ivermectin and that hydroxychloroquine can take cold tumors that aren't responding to therapy anymore. That's what they call a tumor that's not responsive to therapy. It's called a cold tumor. Hydroxychloroquine can turn them hot again so that they will respond. So, and there's a lot of data out there on it. It's a shame that doctors aren't staying up on the data. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are. Um, Dang, Mackie, gotta overthrow the monarchy. Yeah, Laetril's B17. That's right. There's also a site called Chris Beat. I think it's called Chris Beat Cancer. Let me see if I can find it here for you, buddy. Chris Beat Cancer. Yeah, here it is. Let me see if I can share that with you. Here's Chris. I can't remember what. I think, did he have colon cancer? Let me go here. Do a screen share. Chris Beat Cancer share. Let me see if you guys can see this. No thanks. I'm already super healthy. Well, hold on. Let's just take that full screen. Okay, so let me get that comment down. I didn't realize the comment was still sitting up there. Okay. Yes, go away. Okay. So it's this website. It's just called chrisbeatcancer.com. And it talks about Chris, and he was diagnosed with stage, I think that's a 3, I don't have my glasses on, colon cancer in 2003. After surgery, he opted out of chemo and used nutrition and natural therapies to heal. If you'd like to learn how to help yourself heal or prevent cancer, you've come to the right place. Anyway, he's got a blog, coaching, all kinds of stuff there that you can look at. But yeah, Chris Beat Cancer is one of the more famous guys who decided not to do the standard treatments. Now, both of my friends who had had the triple negative breast cancer, one did conventional treatment, one did unconventional treatment, and they both died in about the same amount of months. It's just a mean cancer. Dr. Richardson, I'll look that up. I mean, I think there's a lot of things worth trying, especially when you get to the point of being stage 3, stage 4, as long as it's not something that's going to cause a toxic interaction. And that's just for me. I'm not giving medical advice. But yeah, there's a lot of things I would try. Penny says, thank you. I thought of that too, but their doctor wouldn't do a home visit. And I thought, yeah, where do you live that doctors do? Oh, A&E, you're in the UK. That's right. Yeah, we don't even have home visits here. Yeah, I don't know what your A&E is like. Accident and emergency for you guys that may not know what that means. It's like our emergency room. Yeah, I'm not sure how that works in the UK. Weed should be legal in the land that gave us Monty Python. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Jess says, weed used to grow everywhere in our animals. And our animals ate it. And we got CBD from the meat, and they burned all the weed down. Oh, yeah. Mackie says, Dr. Vern Coleman in the good old days of doctor doing home visits. They were brilliant days. Paper, handwritten records, better too. I miss when I graduated from nursing school, we were still doing paper charting, and I loved it because you could come in, you could read my documentation, and you knew exactly what you were walking into. And now it's all charting by exception. There's just check marks. So you'll type, it'll say heart rate and rhythm, and then there's a little check mark within normal limits. Skin within normal limits. I mean, you would look at the charting and you would think, why is this person even in the hospital if everything is within normal limits? I hate that we've gotten away from doing real charting. CBD is a damn miracle. They took it from us for 100 years. Yeah. Missouri Tim says a lot of rope hemp. Yeah, heavy in CBD, but light in THC. Yeah, there's a lot. there's so many things that are so much more toxic to us um, that they do allow. So like I have restless leg syndrome, and the drugs that they put you on for that are awful. The dopamine agonists like Requip, Mirapex. I can't think of what the other one is called, but I mean, you guys will see me. I'll be sitting here. If you see me like squirming around, it's me shaking my legs because I have restless leg syndrome if I sit. And the dopamine agonists are awful. You can't sleep. They cause me to have terrible hiccups. So I wait to take them at night. And they don't actually help all that much with restless leg syndrome. And so then one of the doctors was like methadone, and I'm like, really? That's the best we can do, methadone. That seems like a lot. But there's just no good solutions. It's really frustrating. Um, Mackie says homeowners are lucky and safe for smoking weed, can't be evicted, probably get a fine, criminal record, or community. Wow, for smoking in your home? That's crazy. RLS, have you had your veins checked? Yeah, the veins are good. I mean, all my circulation stuff passed fine. I've had it for years and years. My dad's got it. Um, it's just maddening. And I've got it since I started the dopamine agonist. Now I've got it in my arms, and it starts earlier in the day. That drug has only made things worse, so I'm going to quit taking it. But yeah, I'll be sitting at night and I have to kind of keep shrugging my shoulders and wiggling it's exhausting. It's just the weirdest thing. There's just not a lot of good treatments. And I know you can do, like, a lot of people find help with cannabis, but I would literally weigh 500 pounds. I mean, I am just starving to death. Even with like the hemp that's just got a tiny bit of THC in it. I mean, I will tip back the refrigerator. It's bad. Well, thank you, Radar Man, and welcome. I don't know that I've seen you in the chat before. All right, guys, it is 12:39. We're going to end it. Please keep Gypsy Princess's client in your prayers, who just found out that her husband is having an affair. It's a small town, so everybody knows, and I have been through that, so I know how hard that, not with Don, but with my ex-husband, and I know how difficult that is. Missouri Tim says William Randolph Hearst got the reefer madness tripe started. He had timber holdings, and hemp was making inroads. Interesting. You guys are full of historical knowledge. Prince Charles is part of the world. Yeah, they're a whole mess. We're doomed. Bless your heart. All right, guys, let me pray us out, and I will see you Friday at 4:30 Eastern for the Nurse Penny podcast. That's a fun show, so come join us for that. You can also come and chat with us at Chicks on the Right on Monday through Friday mornings, starting at 8 a.m. And I think that's about it. So let me pray us out. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. We just pray for people in the chat that are struggling with illness, cancer. We pray that you would take your mighty hand and would bring healing to them, Father, and that you would guide in the right direction, so that we could find therapies that would be helpful and not so catastrophic physically to us that we can barely function. That's just such a difficult thing. Father, we pray for Gypsy Princess's client who is struggling with infidelity in her marriage. We pray that you would bring unity back to that family, that you would resolve this affair, and that her husband's heart would be turned right, and so that he would not betray her and his family. And we pray that the people in the community would be supportive rather than gossips, because that can tear up a marriage. Even if you can get through the infidelity, sometimes that is the harder thing to overcome. Father, I pray for everybody who supports the show with prayer. That means the world to me. And thank you for everybody who prays for my health. Father, I thank you for everybody who supports the show financially. That is such a blessing to us and helps us cover the cost of podcasting. And I just pray that you would return that blessing to them, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Father, keep everyone safe until we meet again. We thank you so much for your son, Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, I love you. Whole big bunches. I will see you on Friday. Nurse Penny.